Hello and welcome to the DEVIANT'S Tour Los Angeles edition. I am so excited to be here with the one and only Oscar Award winning Dustin Lance Black and some incredible co-hosts this afternoon and evening in London. But before we get to the official introductions, I would be remiss not to acknowledge the pain that our nation is feeling amidst the loss of Black lives at the hands of our nation's law enforcement. To the Black folks who may be watching, your lives matter. To my predominantly white fans, we must do better. I've posted a link in the Crowdcast description above for anyone who's looking to make a difference for our friends who identify as QTPOC. In the meantime, please join me in a moment of silence to honor the lives of Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others. Thank you. As I mentioned, this event is supported by some wonderful co-hosts based in Los Angeles doing some incredible work for the LGBTQ plus community. One of them is the Los Angeles LGBT Center, which since 1969 has cared for, championed, and celebrated LGBTQ plus individuals and families in LA and beyond. Today, the center's nearly 800 employees provide services for more LGBT people than any other organization in the world, offering programs, services, and global advocacy that span 4 broad categories: health, social services, and housing, culture and education, leadership, and advocacy. So if you'd like to support them, as I mentioned, there is a link in the event description above with their logo, and you can find more about them. Now, I am so pleased and honored to introduce Jennifer Gregg from the One Archives here in Los Angeles.
Hi, thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Gregg, the Executive Director of the One Archives Foundation, and we are thrilled to be a co-host of today's event. Thank you, Eric, for writing such an important book about LGBTQ history. We were founded in 1952 here in Los Angeles, and we're the oldest continuously operating LGBTQ organization in the nation. An important resource for showcasing the trailblazing and diverse history and culture of the LGBTQ community. Honoring this rich heritage, the One Archives Foundation provides programs for students, educators, and the public in order to support inclusive learning environments and provide gateways to learn about LGBTQ community's full contributions to society. The mission of the One Archives Foundation is to make queer history visible, preserve, protect, and share LGBTQ history, art, and culture. And in order to share the accurate and authentic stories of LGBTQ lives, the Foundation presents and supports projects, exhibitions, and education programs to share the experience with diverse communities worldwide. And we also steward the collection at the One Archives at the University of Southern California Libraries, which is the largest collection of LGBTQ materials in the world, with more than 2 million pieces of history housed at the archives. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at One Archives. One is spelled out. And make sure to visit onearchives.org to receive information about our mission. And again, thank you, Eric. We're honored to be here today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. As people might know or may not know from my book, the first time I ever came to Los Angeles on official purposes was to come visit One's archives, and it forms a pretty significant portion of the endnotes in the back of the book. So thank you for all you do. And now from another one of my favorite places on earth here in Los Angeles is Sam from Book Soup, who can talk about the wonderful work they do in creating community in our own city of Los Angeles.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you. We're so excited to be here. So my name is Samantha Johnson. I'm with Book Soup. I'm an event host and marketing assistant. And we were born in 1975, and for those who don't know, we're located in West Hollywood on the Sunset Strip. So we're very LGBTQIA focused, including our staff, and we're really honored to be here with you both today. So we have events. We've been moving our events to virtual with everything that's going on. But before that, we had at least 4 to 5 a week of events in store to bring our community together. We host the Well Read Black Girl Book Club on Sundays, which is really exciting to have. And so I'm going to introduce our amazing guests today, so we can get started, because I know you guys are excited to get to the good stuff. So I'll begin. Eric Cervini is an award-winning historian of LGBTQ plus culture and politics. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard College and received his PhD in history from the University of Cambridge, where he was a Gates Scholar. The Deviant's War, which was just published this week, is his first book. Congratulations, Eric. Dustin Lancelot is an Academy Award-winning filmmaker, writer, and social activist. He won the Oscar and 2 WGA awards for his screenplay Milk, the biopic of activist Harvey Milk, starring Sean Penn. Black was also a founding board member of the American Foundation for Equal Rights, which successfully led the federal cases for marriage equality in California and Virginia, putting an end to California's discriminatory Proposition 8. Black's memoir, Mama's Boy, was published in 2019 and is out now in paperback. And you can purchase The Deviant's War at the green button below, so I encourage that. And please follow us at BookSoup on Instagram and Twitter. Our Facebook is BookSoup Bookstore. And yeah, we're also taking donations. And actually, because of this week, and thank you everyone for being here, because this has been a very challenging week for all of us in different ways. And thank you, Eric, for honoring that. And we have a resources page on our website right now where you can find petitions, places to donate. And we actually made a list also of books by Black voices that you can purchase to learn more about the history and what you can do better and everything like that. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Eric and Lance, for having us. And yeah, I'm excited to see.
Thank you so much. And like Sam mentioned, there's a link below, but also above. If you click that eye, you can see all the information about our co-hosts, including One Archive's LA LGBT Center, and also links to both of our books, because I really do think that the two works in conversation, the history and the memoir, which actually is a history, which we'll get into, we'll talk about, but they go so well together. And I encourage everyone to shop independent, whether from BookSoup or from their own local shops, because I think if anything, this pandemic has taught us how important these institutions are, not just as a place to buy books, but a place for conversation like this. So thank you so much, Sam, for having us.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to minimize you. And Sam will be back later. Jennifer, again, thank you. And hello from across the ocean.
Hi.
It is so nice to finally meet. So you were just saying that there were some solidarity marches in London.
Yeah, absolutely. On Thursday, there was a very big one today and tomorrow, and you know, the world's paying attention, and it's heartening to see that people care, and that people recognize that, you know, the things that happen in the United States, often for better, but in this case for worse, can have a ripple effect with the rest of the world, and so the rest of the world, I think, seems to be invested in helping fix this.
Right.
So
right.
We'll see. But it is, you know, it's inspiring. It's also good that I can help take part, even though I have an ocean between me and my home country.
Right. Well, I mean, now more than ever, when everyone is, even though 3 of us who are just talking are in the same city, we're essentially just as connected as you and I. So, and I think one of the reassuring parts of this moment is that so many people are turning to literature, to books about anti-racism and about the past to learn how we can do better. And so that's why I'm so excited. I asked you to pick from an excerpt from your own book, which I think is not just a memoir, it's a history, and it also says so much about the connection between Hollywood, activism, writing, family, faith, and a beautiful read. So I'm so excited to ask you to read or share a little bit of it with us.
All right, I'll read as long as you repay the favor.
I will. I promise.
For the people watching, I'm sure people know your book, but it's really important to me. I knew Frank Cavanagh, and too many people these days don't seem to have a clue who he was or why he was important. So I'll do this for you, but it's only so that I can hear some of yours, sir. All right. Here I am. I'm going to put on my acting hat for a second. And I'm just going to read the first half of the prologue. Is that cool?
Perfect.
Here we go. A hot, gauzy morning in the late summer of 1987. That was the first time I ever laid eyes on the streets of Los Angeles. I was 13 years old, but looked 10 at best. An agonizingly shy Texas boy with eyes like water, hair like the sun, and a tanker truck's worth of secrets. I was jammed in the back seat of my mom's massive yellow Malibu Classic between my little brother Todd and our stinking cat, Airborne. My mom said we were on the move. Others would have called it on the run. Days earlier, my family had packed up what little we had of value and vanished without notice from our lives in the Lone Star State, leaving behind my middle school in San Antonio and our Mormon church in the Randolph Ward, heading west. My mom was behind the wheel, her hairspray stiffened curls resting on worried shoulders as she worked the hand controls to speed up and slow down her beast of a car, a colossal artifact from a former life that now had to be wrested into submission by a woman who walked on crutches, her legs in braces, her spine fused and held together with metal bars hidden just beneath the scars that ran the length of her body. My big brother Marcus sat up front beside her. His hair was just as long as hers, but kissing a black leather punk rock jacket covered in pins and buttons that shouted obscenities my mom had miraculously, if not willfully, grown blind to. He had a map spread out on his lap. We were lost. We were scared. But in good Southern Mormon fashion, we kept our terrors to ourselves. Here's the thing. We've been taught our entire lives that places like Los Angeles were filled with folks who traded their souls and salvation for fame, booze, drugs, cash, cars, heterosex, group sex, and dirty, filthy faggot sex. Los Angeles was the embodiment of an unfamiliar, exotic America that we'd been warned to avoid. Liberal, often coastal, a place for sinners and moral relativists. For our ragtag family on the run, passage through this city was a test of spiritual strength. So we plugged our nose in back. Marcus did his best to navigate up front, and my tiny runaway mom rotated the hand control that turned the gear that pressed down on the gas pedal that she hoped might propel us to safety. 2 hours later, Marcus and my mom finally spotted the entrance to the 5 freeway heading north. The terrain grew steeper as we headed into the hills over the Grapevine, a stretch of highway out of LA, where the snarl of traffic gave way to golden grasses, a reservoir lake, ranches, and a meadow filled with wildflowers. These were more familiar sights. This felt more like home. My mom looked up into her rearview mirror, found my eyes, and with all of her mighty love and warmth sent me a strong, silent message. You're safe now, my Lancer. I took a breath or two, pulled out a pen and a spiral notebook, and wrote a letter to a girl back in San Antonio. She and I had recently participated in a one-act drama competition. She played Eve, I played Adam. Her mom was our drama teacher. I described Los Angeles as the second gayest city in the world. It wasn't a compliment. I was already fairly certain that San Francisco was in first position thanks to AIDS hitting the national news when old Hollywood heartthrob Rock Hudson fell out of his closet and into his grave. Since then, even the news shows in Texas had started offering up images of emaciated gay men, most in San Francisco, but others in New York and Los Angeles, dying terrible deaths thanks to their, quote, lifestyle choices. So yes, it seemed that San Francisco was the closest to hellfire, but I was fairly certain Los Angeles wasn't far behind. I suppose I felt it necessary to let someone in Texas know I'd survived our journey through this foreign land. But as we reached the top of the mountain, something in my God-fearing heart stirred, and I looked back toward the city. It was calling to me. If I'm being honest, it had started calling well before we set out on this adventure. If Los Angeles was dangerous, I was curious. How true were the stories I'd heard? Did the people there really do so many strange things to their bodies, their minds, and one another? Did they really make all those movies and TV shows I'd fallen in love with on the rare occasion we were allowed to watch them? And the most dangerous question of all, did the nation's current teen heartthrob, Ricky Schroeder, with his golden hair and ocean blue eyes, actually live somewhere down in all that chaos? That question, and all of its invasive roots and sticky webs, lingered longest in my mind as I watched the city glimmer and shine in the morning sun until it slowly disappeared behind a veil of blue-white smog.
Thank you. So the accompanying wine. I also chose an excerpt about Los Angeles.
Oh boy, all right.
All right. This is from chapter 5. In February 1952, Harry Hay received a telephone call in the middle of the night. Dale Jennings, a slim, bespectacled Fifth Order member of the Mattachine Society, was in jail. He had been in a park restroom when a big, rough-looking character began following him home. A witness saw the stranger forcefully enter Jennings' front door, and Jennings soon found his hand being forced down the front of the man's trousers. Seconds later, Jennings was in handcuffs. The man had been a police officer. The next morning, after Hay posted bail, he and Jennings decided to fight the blatant case of entrapment. That night, at an emergency meeting, the Fifth Order agreed to utilize the case to publicize and dramatize the oppression of homosexuals. They found a lawyer and developed a risky defense strategy. To publicize the case without revealing the existence of the Mattachine Society, the Fifth Order created a citizens committee to outlaw entrapment. They circulated leaflets, "Now is the time to fight. The issue is civil rights," they said, in public restrooms and on park benches, at the gay beaches of Santa Monica, and in the gay-owned shops of West Hollywood. Yes, Dale Jennings was a homosexual, his attorney told the jury, but there was a difference between being a homosexual and engaging in lewd conduct. The only true pervert in the courtroom, he argued, is the arresting officer. After 36 hours of deliberation, 11 out of 12 jurors voted to acquit Jennings. The judge dismissed the case. The Citizens Committee declared victory. Never before had an admitted homosexual walked away from a lewd conduct case in the state of California. If the Mattachine could convince 11 straight jurors that a homosexual was the victim of injustice, the founders asked, could they convince the world of the same? Were homosexuals to realize that these violations of our rights threaten theirs equally, a vast reform might come within our lifetime, wrote Jennings a few months later. This is no more a dream than trying to win a case after admitting homosexuality. Because of Jennings' case, the Mattachine exploded in size. Discussion groups multiplied across Southern California and into the Bay Area, where gay women, too, joined in large numbers. By May 1953, the Fifth Order estimated that it had nearly 100 discussion groups and more than 2,000 participants. One group created a magazine, and Dale Jennings became its first editor. One magazine's inaugural issue, released in January 1953, featured his case as its cover story, and it was soon selling thousands of copies per month. Finally, a gay movement existed in America. So, Los Angeles. That's my first question for you. What is it about this city that creates people like you and me and Dale Jennings and Harry Hay?
Harry Hay. It's all the sunshine. It's what you just read to me is so important because I don't think people, of course some do, but many don't realize that this notion that being an LGBTQ person could ever be a movement that would look like a civil rights movement. This was mind-blowing. In fact, some of my great heroes who were queer sort of made fun of it back in the because they thought, boy, good luck with that. A civil rights fight around being queer. So, you know, and I'm so happy you did this because I've spent so much of my career diving into the LGBTQ roots of San Francisco. And I have, you know, wonderful friends and artists who I admire who've really dug into New York. But LA is really a seminal spot for the LGBT rights movement. And I definitely did not know that. when we drove through there in the 80s. Mostly it was smog filled, and I was terrified. And it would be another decade or so before I would finally have the courage just to drive through West Hollywood, which was incredible in the West Hollywood that's there today. Very narrow sidewalks, still a little dark and frightening. And, you know, you had to walk. I talk about it a bit in my book. You had to, you always walked in pairs in West Hollywood because people got hurt. It's not like that these days. Things have changed. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think it is about Los Angeles?
Well, I think part of it, and some historians have done the great work. I mean, Lillian Faderman and Stuart Timmons, who both form a big chunk of my endnotes because of the work they've done on Gay LA as the title of their book. Right. But I think probably the biggest part is the same thing that any city draws, a large city draws the outsiders, right? I can't remember who said it, but there's this wonderful quote that Los Angeles is where if you tip the country on its side, all the loose marbles end up. And I think that holds true, especially because like places like Washington, D.C., especially, a lot of single, artistic, young folks, men and women, fled their homes where they felt like they didn't have as strong of a connection, and came to a place where they could create a new identity. And I think Hollywood, where you could play someone else and, you know, be different and be queer, and for at least a while be communist. I think it was that conflux of things that really created the birthplace of the modern gay rights movement. But I also wanted to take a step back because your prologue does such a great job of kind of teasing, you know, the conflict that's so central to your own memoir. But I was wondering, for people who don't know where you were coming from and kind of your upbringing and what made it so difficult to enter West Hollywood for the first time, could you explain a little bit about, you know, how faith in Texas and a bit about your earlier years before coming here? Sure.
I mean, I got to experience a lot of, you know, if you look at homophobia as this thing that is supported by the great powers, three of the great powers being the state, right? So police, the law, science being another. So is it a mental illness? Are we going to lobotomize? Are we going to do electroshock, or what's conversion therapy, which is finally on its way out? And then of course, religion. You know, are you going to hell? Which for a lot of people means exclusion from your community and your family if you're found out. So I was military, in a military family, and Mormon, which, you know, the Mormons and the Baptists for a very long time fought for who would be the most homophobic in the States, and living in Texas, where it was quite clear in the politics of the day that I was not, being gay was not cool, and so, and it wasn't good. And if you were queer in Texas in the 70s and 80s, you had a lot of words for what that was. Yes. You knew. So I have friends and people I've known and interviewed who are from places like Arizona who just felt very lonely and didn't know if this was just them. I was certain, mainly because the prophet of the Mormon Church was beamed into our ward one day, and he explicitly said homosexuals are akin to murderers. And so I asked the questions because this was a fascinating word, and I got the answer. And not only did I get the answer, but it matched up with this crush I had on a boy down the street. Right. And so sadly, those few moments of thinking there's a word for me only were joyful for about 5 seconds before I found out I was going to outer darkness, where I'd be separated from my entire family, that I was a criminal according to the state, and would be subject to things like conversion therapy at the very least, if not electroshock therapy, if anyone found out, because at the time the Mormon Church was absolutely in favor of these things. So, you know, it was a bit of a stacked deck. The good, and my mother was very conservative. Everybody in our family, most everybody in the family was very, very conservative. So, and I loved my mom. I didn't want to lose my mom. And for me, though, part of the turn of luck was that my mom had survived an epidemic in the 50s called polio, but just barely. This was an epidemic, not terrifically unlike what we're seeing right now, where 95% of the people were fine. The 5% who showed symptoms, it was devastating. Often they died. My mother was paralyzed from the chest down and disfigured. So she had a difference of her own. And that would become key in our relationship a couple decades on. And certainly it became key quickly after that car ride that took us from Texas to California.
Yeah, and one thing that I stood out from your book is this running motif of a tribe that you found yourself in. And one excerpt that I highlighted is, perhaps if I had known I had a people, a history, and a brotherhood with Tim's people, if I had known enough to give Tim the embrace he deserved for his courage in sharing his difference, or if I'd had the courage to be equally honest with mine, then I might not have ended that hot spring day riding home in my cruddy bike, confused, tears streaming down my face, with new shame stacked on top of old. Perhaps I might have ended that day with a sturdier friendship and a new ally, but I didn't know I had yet to learn our rich histories and the incalculable value of difference. So there are so many beautiful themes contained within that, but I was especially struck by the concept of a tribe, and it's something you see with Harry Hay, of this brotherhood of the oppressed, essentially. So I'm curious, why that word? Why is it that that was kind of the theme that runs throughout?
Well, I think part of it is that when I'm writing a book about history, and I'll be curious what you think. I'm going to have this question for you about yours as well. But my question is always, how does it serve tomorrow? Not because if it's purely nostalgia, then I think you're wasting your time and your energy. I think the past is powerful as long as we use it to make today and tomorrow a bit better than the past.
Yeah.
And so part of it was just that as I'm writing it, there was all this talk of tribalism that really, it was hard not to hear talk of tribalism starting in 2015 into the 2016 election, certainly. And it was all being used as a negative. And it was negative, the way, people were going to their own corners, and people within communities and even families were finding their own tribes and separating themselves. And usually those tribes were political, and had more to do with, what you put on your voter registration card than anything else. But I just thought, I think I don't want to say that having a tribe is bad, because there's real benefits to it. And to having your people, and for queer people, it's often important for us to have not only our family, but our found family. Because usually we don't have the mothers and the fathers who understand what we need to hear as a sexual minority in the world in order to survive and to thrive. And so we have to have found family to help that part of it, no matter how wonderful our parents are. And so I just wanted to start to investigate tribe as this thing that was quite positive, a family of difference, with the understanding that finding your tribe is a good bit of work. It can give you a foundation, it can give you strength, but if you stop there, you're missing the whole point. That the idea is to be a scout within a tribe, to meet people from other tribes, other groups, to share ideas, listen to ideas, draw together. The gay liberation movement would not be successful if we haven't, at least on occasion, figured out how to make alliances with other groups, other tribes. And we're in one of those moments right now where the queer group, the queer tribe, has an obligation to stand up for our Black family. And it's not, being in that tribe doesn't mean, well, I'm safe and I'm just looking after my own. That's not how it works. It's building those coalitions of the us's that once we've locked arms, that we can change the laws and win even at the ballot box. So I think I just wanted to turn the idea of a tribe on its head. I think there can be strength in it as long as you understand that it's not an island. It's something that must have bridges coming off it to many other tribes, and that curiosity must help build those bridges. So that's what the book is about to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said about building relationships and alliances with other tribes is so important, because yes, we have shared experiences amongst ourselves, which bring us together through difference, but we also have, because of those shared experiences of being oppressed, we're better equipped to understand other tribes who have also been oppressed, especially as you mentioned. I think there's been so much great discussion now about how Stonewall was a riot, how it was led by trans women of color. And I would urge anyone listening, to think bigger than just Stonewall. It wasn't just that one night where trans women of color were important. It was the entirety, whether it was Frank Kameny, Bayard Rustin, all of these incredible figures, Harry Hay borrowing from the rhetoric of the Black Freedom Movement every step of the way throughout the 60s, even into the 50s. Our tribe was borrowing from the Black Freedom Movement, from that tribe. And of course, you have to remember they overlap as well.
And also from I think, yes, we certainly were borrowing language and strategy from, I think, two movements, really, which I think is the civil rights movement, but also the peace movement. And so many of the young people who began to march and fight back at Stonewall had actively participated in peace movement as well. I mean, the fact that it's called the Gay Liberation Front is stealing language from the peace movement. So, which I hope is no slight to also having borrowed from the Black Civil Rights Movement. I'm so pleased that there are many histories about Marsha P. Johnson now. I hope we don't forget about all of the people who came before to get us to a place where we could have a Stonewall. And those people were also, of every race. You mentioned Bayard Rustin. Well, James Baldwin. There were a lot of Black pioneers who made it possible to have a Stonewall. And I was sort of curious what you thought of that. I just know in my experience with, say, Milk, almost no one knew who he was 15, 20 years ago when I started trying to make a movie about him. Have you run into that with Frank and with Mattachine?
100%. I mean, it's almost exactly reading your book and reading what you went through to produce that, where, people in San Francisco knew his name. But anyone outside, certainly a gay kid in Central Texas, certainly did not know his name. And on it, I've been very public about it. I started writing this book after watching Milk, realizing, how did I not know this story to begin with? If I'm going to start studying history and I didn't even know the history of my own tribe, and then B, what other histories must be out there? And that's why I'm so excited for our conversation, because I'm hoping to use it to continue this tradition and continue this pattern of, I hope people read both of our books, watch your film or other films, and ask, who else is out there? What other stories need to be told? And so, I'm so excited that people are going to learn Frank Kameny's name, but I'm even more excited that they're going to meet the secondary characters like Bayard Rustin, like Marsha P. Johnson, Ernestine Eppinger, these incredible activists who were there before Stonewall, who were balancing their identities of being Black, of being queer, and doing the hard work even before the riots. And I think they all deserve their own books, their own films. So that's why I'm so excited. And I wanted also
just to go off for a second, of course they do. They all do, because I'm sorry, but like if all we have is, some of the folks from Stonewall and some of the folks from San Francisco, that's not a history. And we've been robbed of our history. Queer people have been robbed of our history. It's been buried in shame and fear, and for good reason. Because, if you wrote your book, or if I made one of my films 50 years ago, we would be felons. We would be mentally ill. We would be subjected to, whatever, electroshock therapy, lobotomization, right? Jail time. We certainly, and even today, we could still legally be kicked out of our home if we're a renter, or fired from our jobs for doing this sort of thing. So, there wasn't a lot of upside to sharing our history, and certainly not making it, easily accessible. And our history is so important. I think, Larry Kramer, who we lost, broke my heart. Larry was, a real inspiration and pain in my ass. And someone I got to meet and talk with a good bit. But he'd always say, you cannot be a people if you do not have a history. And so there's a massive amount of reconstruction that has to happen. And if all we're left with is Marcia and Harvey, well, that's not a history. Those are two shards in a giant mosaic, and we have to keep building. We have to keep rebuilding. So when you asked me if I would do this, I was so excited because I also knew Frank Kameny, and he was a hilarious, insane man. And,
I have to ask that story. So because I know we have a lot of questions from the audience, but if you do feel obligated to tell this story, where we can save it for later, whatever you feel.
I have a bunch of. I mean, I was lucky enough to know Frank in the last many years of his life, and and he was a troublemaker, and you figure that out pretty quickly. And so, and his home was kind of insane and filled with things. A giant sign from the street that was named after him behind the couch he liked to sit on. And I was working on a movie called J. Edgar, where Leonardo DiCaprio was going to play J. Edgar Hoover, and we were going to open up what we knew about J. Edgar Hoover's sexuality, which was sad and closeted. And so I said, well, if we want to talk about what gay meant way back then, why don't we go to the guy who had to survive J. Edgar Hoover?
Literally.
Right. So I brought Leo over to Frank Kameny's house. And we walk in.
I'm obsessed with this.
Yeah, we walk in, and and I thought, because Frank could school you. He would take you, and that's what I wanted him to do. Leonardo to school. And that's why Leonardo went over there. And I swear, I don't know what happened to Frank's activist teacher troublemaker brain when Leo walked in, but I think he just found him incredibly cute, and just started to ask him about his personal life and his sex life and his life. And I was like, Frank, what is this? And it didn't end up being the longest meeting of all time. I think Frank wanted to find out if Leo was, where he was on the spectrum of sexuality and things, and was disappointed, probably, to learn that it wasn't going to happen. Frank was not going to get Leo. So it wasn't the most fruitful, but it was really funny to watch. And Leo was like, that was great. So,
someday, maybe later today, I'll share the photos of the inside of his house, because it was literally, for anyone who didn't, he referred to himself as a pack rat. I don't want to diagnose him as a hoarder, but if you look at the photos, it's just the entire house covered in stacks and stacks and stacks of files and papers and documents and periodicals. And yeah, I like to think of my book as kind of the radicalization and the liberation of Frank Kameny, because until really his 1970, he was the first openly gay man to run for the U.S. House of Representatives. And until that moment, until that campaign, I don't want to give too much away, but he was very attached to respectability and, wearing suits and ties at all the pickets and protests and looking employable, in his words. And then I think he realized, as the 70s inched closer and closer, that was a bit self-defeating. And then what you hit the 70s, which I don't really cover. I end the book in 71. And so I encourage anyone out there to write the sequel of Frank. In the 70s, he narrated a pornographic film that was shot all throughout DC, and he kind of gave the narration to it. He shrieked at multiple events in the 70s. There is so much out there. There are incredible people who were around with him, like Luke Chabarro, Rick Rosendahl, who might be watching. So just to encourage people out there, it's all waiting to be told, these stories. I want to make sure. What's that?
He was a hell of a troublemaker, and we owe so much to him. I mean, you're watching people rise up right now around the White House, and bless them for having the courage to do that, given particularly what we're all facing right now. But Frank, I mean, just those images. If people would just Google image search Frank Kameny and gay is good, and look, it's just a gaggle, a little group of, as you said, suit and tie, which by the way was also borrowed from the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
That was part of the attire of the civil rights movement. And we're marching in front of the White House. How incredibly brave was that?
Truly.
I mean, there was not, obviously, we're talking about, quite some time before you would ever hear of Stonewall or gay liberation, or even people talking about being queer as a civil right. And there he is with a sign that said gay is good. Yes, he did make the women wear dresses, which is horrible. But I'm glad to hear he corrected that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he figured it out. And also, I think what you said about the bravery, then you would know from researching J. Edgar that the FBI was there, literally, physically there, photographing each and every one of these or most of the marches. And State Department investigators were also there, photographing license plate numbers, faces of the demonstrators, so that they could then go cross-reference them, find out whether they held a federal job, which a lot of them did, and then fire them, purge them, and that would follow them for the rest of their lives, placing them in a second-class citizenship group. So
it was very brave. And by the way, the people who are out there demonstrating now and raising their voices and giving speeches, the FBI might be doing that still. Oh,
I'm sure.
And so it's up to us. It's up to us to change the system so that stops happening.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's not. None of it is unique to the gay liberation movement. I'm gonna, because we're in the moment right now. LGBTQ people, we have so much more that we need to fight for and win, but we've done awfully fucking good over the past decade or so, and we owe our Black brothers, sisters, neighbors, family, we need to support their aims and what it is they're trying to achieve in changing the system. And we've learned a few tricks. So when possible, lend a hand, get out there and more help.
Amen.
Help.
Amen. On that note, we have a lot of questions. So I'm going to bring back Sam from Book Soup, who can sift through them, and then I don't have to be the one who gets in trouble for not picking someone else's question.
I can go in order of top to bottom.
Yeah, so if you see a question you like, you can upvote it and bring it to the top, and then it'll be democratic.
Yeah.
Someone just brought me a cocktail, so ask away. Hey man, it's Saturday night here.
That's true. So thank you. I'm drinking my coffee still.
All right, question number 1. What do you think about Twitter white gays? They always post hateful comments toward famous gays and criticize everything and everyone. How is this toxic behavior affect the LGBTQ community? From Sachita. That's a handful of questions.
That is a handful.
People in the gay community that go after their own?
Yeah, I guess to sum it up, yeah, toward famous people or.
I mean, welcome to being on the planet Earth. Like, I don't know. If whenever you do anything that is important or brings you any notoriety, you're going to catch hell for it. Particularly when you're fighting for something that you think is meaningful, you're going to catch hell for it. And I tell the young activists out there who come to me asking advice, one of my first pieces of advice is the first point of resistance isn't going to be your perceived enemy. It's going to be from your own. Because we're all, when it comes to civil rights work, we're feeling our way through the dark, people. We don't know where we're going or even exactly how we'll get there. We're all trying our best. We all have different ideas, different strategies, and it doesn't matter. you just have to have faith in what it is you believe. Listen to the critics sometimes if it's constructive and helpful, but tune the rest of the noise out and get on with it. I mean, we certainly, when we decided, and I say we, was a small group of us, 5, 6 people early on, decided to sue the state of California in federal court, saying that marriage was a right and that Prop 8 had to go. Most of my mentors, heroes, friends, and inspirations in that queer movement, in the LGBTQ movement, told me I was an idiot. Wrote op-eds about it. I mean, who cares about people saying I have bad hair on Twitter? I couldn't care about
I get that too.
I mean, honestly, like, who cares? If you, that's, you know, the best piece of advice I got there was also from a mentor of mine who said, other people's opinions are none of your business. It's just not. Who cares? So you know, but expect resistance from within first. Listen, some of it's going to be constructive. Take the stuff that's constructive, use it to pressure test your ideas. And I'll say the massive amount of heated criticism we got when we filed that case made our case stronger, made us work harder. So, fine. The rest of it, you know, I don't know. What are you going to do? Who cares? Block them.
Amen. That's my MO.
All right, next question. What role do you feel queer people of faith have in the quest for equality, and what is your greatest piece of advice you have for them? That is from Destiny.
Do you want to go for this one?
No, I mean, your book, yeah, your book covers it, so.
My book covers it. You know, I just came out. All right, so the 2 books. I don't see it around here, but yeah. Listen, I grew up with a great amount of faith. I'm not a Mormon anymore, but I know that there are a lot of people of faith who are also LGBTQ. And I would say to them, you are in a fantastic position to build bridges and open up the lines of communication that will be necessary to change those institutions. I know that for a lot of people, and I've felt this before, you want to burn that institution down. Okay, that's a very long-term project, if that's what you want to do. And I'm not saying I agree that that should be done, but that's, what about all of the queer kids who are growing up in it right now? You're just going to leave them behind while you do your thing? No. See if you can't also move those institutions away from their policies that really deeply injure LGBTQ kids. And those are the conversations. You'll see it, you know, the short version is, my mom, through courage and curiosity, came around to accepting me as her gay son. And by the end of her life, she was called the Queen of the Queens. Yeah. But after I lost her, I realized I had a duty to repay that favor and to show the courage and the curiosity to go back to the Mormon church and see if we couldn't create some change that could make the lives of queer kids in Utah and in the Mormon church better. And the book details how that was done. And we have made some progress, but not all the way there yet. So I would say, to me, the most powerful thing you can do is to open up your heart and share your very personal stories with people in the church who are in a position to help make change. And as much as we all want to argue the law and the facts and the science, and I love to argue those things, there's a time and a place for it. It doesn't tend to be incredibly effective when you're in a faithful space. In a faithful space, I found that if you talk about how something felt, how it impacted you to be excluded from church, community, family, what that experience was like, the things that you miss from being included in a faithful space, that can be incredibly impactful. And by the way, eye-opening to a lot of heterosexual folks who haven't spent enough time thinking about how their interpretations of the Bible kill queer kids.
That's a wonderful answer. Courage and curiosity, that's great. I love that. So this one's from Alan. Do you believe there is a unified gay community which includes gay men and lesbians? Well, just women, sorry. Thank you. Oh wait, that question just disappeared.
I'm staring at it if you want me to finish it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it is my observation that in large part these two groups live apart and only seem to, there it is. Okay, interact when it comes to pride celebrations or gay rights focused on marriage/family equality.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take that one?
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, these are big questions and I think important ones.
Good.
I think there could have been a unified queer community. I think if there's anything I've learned from studying history, the one thing that stands out over and over that you see in the book is time and time again missed opportunities for that coalition building of having a truly inclusive rainbow flag. And unfortunately, 99.9% of the times, our ancestors within our tribe messed up. They didn't take the opportunity to build the coalitions that they could have with the Black Freedom Movement, with people like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and their organization. They did the opposite. And I think now we have a moral obligation, first as humans, to say Black trans lives matter. And second, to compensate for our past sins and to not only say it as humans, but to go the extra step and to make up for our past errors and sins of being exclusionary and literally stealing from their own activism and then pushing them out of our own tribe. And so I think we, especially as cis white gay men, need to be on the very front lines of this battle, putting